Have you ever found yourself wondering why we often sabotage ourselves, even when everything seems to be going perfectly? That inner voice that insists on questioning, doubting, and sometimes destroying what we've built. It's a universal dilemma, but few writers have dared to delve into the depths of this conflict like Fyodor Dostoevsky. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky introduces us to a peculiar protagonist, living in isolation, consumed by his own tortuous reflections and contradictions. He isn't just a character, he's a mirror of our own human condition, that part of ourselves we'd rather ignore. His confession begins with a striking declaration: "I am a sick man, a spiteful man, an unpleasant man." How can we not feel a shiver when we realize that to some extent we all harbor this underground within us? Dostoevsky wrote this book in a specific context, 19th century Russia, a period marked by the rise of ideas like extreme rationalism and nihilism, yet in doing so he created a timeless work that transcends its era. Speaking directly to the anxieties of modern humanity. We live in a world that promises instant happiness, where everything is meant to be optimized and calculated. But what if what truly defines us isn't the pursuit of comfort, but rather the irrational desire to assert our individuality, even at the cost of suffering? On this journey through the underground of the human soul, Dostoevsky challenges us to confront truths we avoid. Why do we find pleasure in suffering? Why do we resist formulas that claim to solve all our problems? And above all, are we truly free, or are we merely following impulses we don't even understand? Get ready to dive into the work Friedrich Nietzsche described as one of the most brilliant analyses of human psychology. The Underground Man isn't just a warning, he's an invitation to look within and face the abyss that resides in all of us. To understand Notes from Underground, it is crucial to return to the turbulent context in which Dostoevsky wrote his work. 19th century Russia was in turmoil. Revolutionary ideas such as nihilism, extreme rationalism, and the early traces of utopian socialism were capturing the imagination of young people and promising a new era of progress and equality. However, for Dostoevsky, these currents of thought represented an existential threat to the human soul. In 1862, Ivan Turgenev published Fathers and Sons, one of the first works to popularize the term nihilism. The characters in this work argued that there were no absolute values or transcendent truths, that everything should be questioned and reevaluated. The nihilist movement believed that through reason and science, humanity could build a perfect society where suffering would be abolished and injustices corrected. In practice, however, this meant the rejection of traditions, moralities, and even faith. Dostoevsky watched the rise of these ideas with horror. For him, the attempt to reduce man to a rational calculation was not only an illusion, but also an affront to the complexity of the human condition. His travels through Europe in the early 1860s reinforced this perception. In his letters, he wrote that the West was sinking into selfish individualism, where the I was glorified above all else. This obsession with individual autonomy seemed to him a direct path to isolation and dehumanization. It was in this environment that Dostoevsky responded powerfully with The Underground Man. He wrote Notes from Underground as a direct critique of the work What Is to Be Done by Nikolai Chernyshevsky, one of the greatest advocates of utopian socialism in Russia. In Chernyshevsky's view, man is inherently good, and if educated to understand his true interests, he could create a perfect society based on rational and utilitarian principles. To illustrate his vision, Chernyshevsky used the metaphor of the Crystal Palace, a symbolic building where all human problems would be resolved. Dostoevsky, however, saw this dream as a dangerous trap. He believed that man was not purely rational, and that when faced with the attempt to fit him into a perfect formula, he would inevitably rebel. The underground, where his protagonist resides, is a direct response to the Crystal Palace, a place of irrationality, suffering, and contradiction, but also of genuine freedom. For Dostoevsky, this freedom was inseparable from faith and spirituality. He saw the growing rejection of religion as a threat to the human soul. In his later works, such as Demons, he expanded this critique, linking atheism to the rise of totalitarian states and the loss of individuality. The underground, therefore, is both a physical space and a metaphor for the spiritual dilemma of a society that has abandoned God. But what makes the underground so relevant to us today? In a world where progress is idolized and science promises solutions to everything, could it be that we are repeating the same mistakes Dostoevsky tried to warn us about? This question brings us to the next point: the underground man as a reflection of our own human condition. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unpleasant man. Thus begins the confession of the protagonist in Notes from Underground. This unnamed man, living in isolation, is one of the most emblematic personifications of the human condition. He is contradictory, hyperlucid, and self-destructive, and his reflections force us to confront the most disturbing aspects of ourselves. The underground man does not act like other characters in the literature of his time. He does not seek redemption nor justify his flaws. On the contrary, he embraces them. This brutal honesty is what makes him so disconcerting and fascinating. Dostoevsky describes him as a man paralyzed by his own consciousness. He thinks too much, feels too deeply, and as a result, is incapable of action. In his view, the man of action, one who acts without hesitation, leads a shallow existence, whereas he, being so acutely aware, is condemned to inertia and suffering. This hyper-awareness is described as both a sickness and a form of freedom. For the underground man, the ability to reflect on his choices, even when they are irrational, is a way of asserting his individuality. He rejects scientific determinism and utilitarian ideas that reduce humans to predictable machines. For him, 2 plus 2 does not necessarily equal 4. Sometimes 2 plus 2 can be 5, because man in his essence is irrational, unpredictable, and contradictory. Dostoevsky uses his protagonist to explore the duality between reason and instinct, freedom and chaos. The underground, in this sense, is both a place of imprisonment and liberation. It is the perfect metaphor for the state of alienation and isolation we feel when we become excessively self-aware. Who hasn't experienced a moment of paralysis from overthinking something simple? Or worse yet, who hasn't sabotaged themselves, fully aware that they were acting against their own best interests? The protagonist's internal conflict is also a struggle against existential emptiness. He fiercely criticizes the man of action, yet at the same time envies his simplicity. He acknowledges that his intelligence places him in a state of superiority, but that same intelligence prevents him from finding satisfaction. This ambiguity is what makes the underground man so deeply human. He is a blend of pride and self-loathing, rebellion and conformity, rationality and chaos. Dostoevsky also presents us with a grim view of the relationship between consciousness and suffering. For the underground man, overthinking is a curse. He finds pleasure in suffering, a kind of psychological masochism that sets him apart from others. Man is passionate about suffering, he writes, suggesting that suffering is not only inevitable, but essential to the human experience. Without it, there is no growth, no depth, no freedom. In this sense, the underground man foreshadows many of the dilemmas of the modern world. We live in an age of abundant information, where we are constantly encouraged to reflect on and analyze every aspect of our lives. Yet, at the same time, this hyperconsciousness can trap us in cycles of doubt and self-sabotage. We are more connected than ever, yet also more isolated, more aware of our flaws, yet unable to overcome them. Dostoevsky invites us to ponder, is suffering truly a necessary price for freedom? By rejecting the subterranean parts of ourselves, are we distancing ourselves from our own humanity? What was Dostoevsky trying to tell us in Notes from Underground? Far more than an introspective account of a tormented man, the book is a profound and unsettling warning. Written at a time when rationalism and technological progress promised a bright future, Dostoevsky raised a cautionary flag against the illusions of determinism and utopian dreams. His message, however, transcends his era and remains remarkably relevant in the modern world. In Dostoevsky's view, the central issue was not science or progress itself, but the attempt to reduce the human being to an equation. He feared that in the pursuit of definitive solutions to life's dilemmas, humanity would sacrifice its most precious essence, its freedom. In Notes from Underground, the protagonist rejects the Crystal Palace, a metaphor for the perfect utopia imagined by Chernyshevsky. This palace, brilliant and flawless, promised a world where everything was calculated and predictable, eliminating suffering and conflict. But for Dostoevsky, such perfection was a prison. Humanity, he argued, is not a machine. Even when all its needs are met, it finds pleasure in destruction, defiance, and creating chaos. As the underground man observes, shower mankind with all the earthly blessings, drown them in a sea of happiness, and yet, out of sheer spite, they will play a trick on you. This statement resonates as a strikingly accurate diagnosis of the dissatisfaction that pervades modern life. We live in an era where science promises solutions to almost everything. Artificial intelligence, advances in medicine, and global connectivity give us the illusion that we are closer than ever to solving humanity's problems. But does this really make us happier? Dostoevsky would argue otherwise. For him, man needs struggle, suffering, and unpredictable choices to feel truly alive. In many ways, the modern world reflects what Dostoevsky feared. Consumerism and technological advancements promise us comfort and efficiency, but often leave us more alienated and empty. The pursuit of constant happiness can deprive us of the nuances of the human experience. After all, if we eliminate suffering, What's left to give joy its value? Moreover, Dostoevsky's warning about the loss of individuality is more relevant than ever. Social media, for example, creates an environment where we are encouraged to conform to predefined standards and molds. This pressure for perfection is a modern form of the Crystal Palace, dazzling, seductive, but incapable of housing true humanity. The Underground Man reminds us that free will is what defines us, even if it means acting against logic or self-interest. This message is a direct critique of determinism, the idea that all our actions can be predicted and controlled by scientific or social laws. To Dostoevsky, this vision is an attack on the human soul. He argues that we are irrational by nature, and it is this irrationality that makes us free. But this freedom comes at a price: suffering. The Underground Man finds pleasure in his pain because it is proof of his existence, of his individuality. In a world that seeks to eliminate discomfort, Dostoevsky reminds us that perhaps suffering is essential to feeling alive. What do we do then with this warning? Are we becoming more and more prisoners of comfort, predictability, and rationalism? How can we preserve our humanity in a world that seems to conspire to erase it? The underground, in Dostoevsky's view, is not merely a state of isolation or a reflection of alienation. It is also a conscious choice. It is the place where a human being, free from the impositions of a society that demands conformity, can confront their true essence, no matter how chaotic, contradictory, or painful it may be. The protagonist of Notes from Underground lives in this state of inertia, not because he is trapped by external forces, but because he refuses to be reduced to a cog in the vast machinery of society. To him, being free means resisting determinism and the promises of utopian perfection. Even if this freedom entails suffering, he embraces it as an act of rebellion against a world that tries to dictate who he should be. This choice, however, is neither easy nor comfortable. The underground is a place of constant confrontation. There, no masks or distractions exist. It is a space of heightened self-awareness where the individual must face their contradictions and flaws. As the protagonist says, "I am a chaos of conflicting emotional impulses." This statement encapsulates the internal struggle that many of us avoid by losing ourselves in routine or the superficial comforts of everyday life. Dostoevsky invites us to consider the underground as a place of resistance, where suffering is an essential component of preserving individuality. In a world seeking formulas for happiness, he reminds us that discomfort and pain are necessary for growth and for connecting with the depths of our humanity. But this vision is not an apology for suffering's sake. On the contrary, Dostoevsky shows us that the underground is, above all, a space of choice. The protagonist rejects the Crystal Palace not because he is incapable of understanding it, but because he recognizes that true freedom cannot exist in a system where everything is preordained. He writes, "I reject the Crystal Palace because you can't even stick your tongue out there." This metaphor, both ironic and profound, reflects the rejection of a perfect life that is devoid of authenticity. The underground, therefore, is a reminder that freedom is tied to imperfection. To choose the underground is to choose the freedom to think, feel, and act in ways that challenge norms, even if it leads to pain. It is to resist the temptation of easy solutions and embrace the complexity of existence. In the modern world, the underground manifests in different forms. It can be the act of disconnecting from social media to reconnect with oneself, the refusal to adhere to consumption patterns that don't reflect our values, or even the courage to question dominant narratives that promise instant happiness. These are acts of resistance that preserve our individuality and remind us that freedom often requires sacrifice. But the big question remains: are we willing to embrace the underground? Are we ready to face suffering as an integral part of life rather than something to be eliminated? It's a dilemma each of us must answer, one that Dostoevsky leaves unresolved. After diving into the depths of Dostoevsky's underground, we are left with an inevitable question. What does this work teach us about ourselves? More than just a narrative about suffering and contradictions, Notes from Underground is a masterclass on the human condition and the struggle for meaning in a world that often defies reason. Dostoevsky shows us that human freedom cannot be encapsulated by formulas, systems, or utopias. He challenges the notion that scientific progress or extreme rationalism can solve the deepest dilemmas of existence. After all, what does it mean to be human, if not the ability to act against our own interests, to defy logic, to prefer suffering over comfort? The Underground Man is a reflection of our most hidden and contradictory impulses. He reminds us that the desire for freedom is not merely a pursuit of easy choices, but an act of rebellion against anything that reduces us to mere automatons. As he states, man is a being monstrously ungrateful. Yet, this ingratitude is not just a flaw. It is proof of our uniqueness. of our refusal to be governed by laws or calculations that fail to account for our subjectivity. In the modern world, Dostoevsky's underground takes on new meanings. We live in an era that values efficiency, productivity, and well-being as unquestionable goals. We are bombarded with narratives promising instant happiness and a perfect life, from apps that monitor our mood to formulas for living better in 5 steps. But, like the underground protagonist, we often find an emptiness in these promises. The underground challenges us to embrace our imperfections and value discomfort as an integral part of existence. It teaches us that suffering should not be eradicated at all costs, but understood as a source of growth and authenticity. After all, how could we recognize joy without experiencing pain? Dostoevsky also warns us about the danger of losing ourselves in the pursuit of perfection. The obsession with eliminating life's chaos, whether through technology, science, or ideologies, can lead us to a state of apathy where we stop questioning, challenging, and creating. This is precisely what the Crystal Palace symbolizes, a place of absolute order, but devoid of true freedom. Dostoevsky's final message is clear. Life is not a mathematical formula. We are irrational, unpredictable beings, and that is our greatest strength. Embracing this complexity is what allows us to live with depth and authenticity. The underground is not a place to remain forever, but a necessary stage for those who seek to understand themselves and the world around them. And now, are we ready to look inward, to face our own underground? Dostoevsky's lesson is not comfortable, but it is liberating. It reminds us that to be human is to accept our contradictions, live with courage, and find meaning even in chaos. And so, we reach the end of this journey through the underground, a voyage into the depths of the human soul, guided by the brilliant mind of Fyodor Dostoevsky. We've explored the contradictions, conflicts, and uncomfortable truths that dwell within each of us. The underground man is not just a literary figure. He is a raw and honest reflection of the human condition, with its flaws, its irrationalities, and its desperate search for meaning. This work challenges us to confront a reality we often avoid. Freedom, in its purest form, is neither comfortable nor predictable. It demands sacrifice, confrontation, and the acceptance that suffering is an intrinsic part of existence. But at the same time, it offers something no utopia can ever provide: the chance to truly be ourselves in all our imperfection and glory. Now, I want to thank you for making it this far. This reflection only makes sense because you, like me, chose to dive into the complexities of the underground. I remember one sleepless night, rereading Dostoevsky, when I realized that many of my anxieties weren't weaknesses, but signs that I was living intensely, confronting what we often prefer to ignore. And that's what Dostoevsky does so well. He gives us the courage to look within, even when what we see isn't easy to accept. Now tell me, have you liked this video yet? Have you shared your opinion in the comments or sent it to someone who also needs to reflect on the lessons from the underground? If not, now is the time to do it. I know, it might seem like I'm just talking to myself here, but the truth is, every like, every comment is like you saying, I care about these ideas too. So, be generous with this simple gesture. I promise the underground will thank you. And before wrapping up, have you noticed these 2 videos on the screen right now? One of them might open a new door to another reflection you didn't even know you needed. The other, who knows, could be the push you've been waiting for to understand something that felt out of reach. Click on one of them, or both, and find out. Maybe the underground has more to say to you than you expected. Thank you for your company on this philosophical journey. See you on the next dive into the human mind. Until then, take care of your underground. It has so much to teach you.